Welcome to the Philly Film Room podcast. Along with my co host, Eric Sidewater, I'm Nick Waters, and the Eagles enter the bye week. And the bye week is usually a time for reflection. But with the bye week being so early this year, there's not going to be as much reflection. But having said that, we do have 4 games under our belt that we can review and kind of extrapolate the data and parse out and see what is this team's path forward, right? So that's what we're going to be doing today on this bye week episode of the podcast. But before we get to that, Eric, I want to hear, what did you think of the Eagles' disaster in Tampa? And is there really any hope for this team going forward?
Yeah, I do think there's hope. Obviously, as you mentioned, it was a disaster. Team came out flat. I was very obvious that the weather got to them. They got behind big, making them one-dimensional on offense, and they didn't have any good receivers out there that could overcome that. So the things that I mentioned I was worried about against the Falcons, which was pass rush. That's because that can linger throughout the whole season and that can be your undoing. That was obviously a big factor. Now, the pass rush can't affect a quarterback who's getting it out in 1.9 seconds. So that's where you start to have this whole discussion about the coaches should have had the players play press or play tighter, and then it's like you hear Fangio told the guys to play tighter, but it didn't do anything. And then it's like, do you have the personnel to even pull off what you're trying to accomplish? This is the $1 million question. How much of the blame can be attributed to coaches? How much to players? And I hope that we can unpack that throughout this episode. But obviously, we're missing some of our best players. So when they come back, that should reinvigorate the team.
Definitely. And hopefully we get a number of those guys back after the bye week. But I did want to touch back on something you brought up. You mentioned the weather, and I wanted to touch on this for a quick second again, because there's some people in the comments talking about how, both teams had to play through the weather, and these are professional athletes, and that this really isn't that big of a deal. So I touched on a little bit last in the review episode of the game, and I touched on a little bit about how it does take some time to acclimate to warm weather and warm climates. This is a very real phenomenon, and there's real physiological changes that happens when you play in warmer climates and when you become acclimated to those climates. Some of those changes are very real, which includes increased blood flow, which allows you to transfer and regulate your heat better. It allows you to sweat more quickly, and then it allows you to sweat at a higher volume, so you can cool yourself down faster and at a quicker rate. In addition to that, when you sweat, you're losing less salt in your sweat, so you're losing less electrolytes when you do sweat. And then you have an increased synthesis of heat shock proteins. So when you are acclimated to the heat, it is a huge advantage. And I mentioned something that the best way for these guys to get acclimated very quickly would be to go in a sauna and sit on an exercise bike. That I was being serious. Exercising in the heat is one of the fastest ways to acclimate to the heat. So you could do that in about 2 weeks. That's not realistic in an NFL season when these guys need to recover week to week, but just something that could potentially be done to acclimate to this kind of weather. And here's the thing, heat regulating is a real business, right? There's been numerous studies that show that have studied people when they work out in between their sets, right? When they're able to cool down their body temperature, they're able to, and this has been shown through numerous studies, that they're able to perform more repetitions on their sets, and they're able to perform higher 1 rep maxes. So products have been made specifically to handle this challenge. There's things, they make like these cooling gloves, because the way to cool your body very quickly is through the palms of your hands and the bottom of your feet and through the skin on your face. So there's these thousands of dollars worth of cooling gloves to cool professional athletes down. These things are very real. So, and what happens is you deacclimate very quickly in about a week. So when the Eagles are sitting here practicing in 60 and 70 degree weather, there is no way that they can acclimate themselves in time for when they go down to Tampa after they just have a hurricane pass through and it's extremely humid and temperatures are around 100 degrees. So the heat is a real thing. Now, one of the commenters said that Chris Long was telling a personal story of times when he had to face extreme heat. And I don't know why I never told a story from when I was playing. I never played in the NFL or big time college, but I do have a good story from when I had to face extreme heat from my college days. So it was homecoming for us, and this was around late September, early October, and I played college football in Northern Illinois. So at this time, it's like perfect fall weather, right? I'm deacclimated from the summer heat. But during this day, there was thunderstorms so much so that we ended up having about an hour and a half rain delay with like 2 minutes left in the game. But it's all good. We came out. Your boy got the game-winning interception, so it was well worth it. But it was super muggy that day. When we first stepped out of the locker room, it just hit you in the face. And like going through warmups, you knew it was going to be a very tough day. But leading into that game, all week in film, I had noticed something. Every time they were in a 3-by-1 formation, on the backside of the 3-by-1 formation, on the solo receiver side, they would run a post corner, but they would never run a post. So I knew if I got the chance to be lucky enough where they were out in a 3-by-1 set and I was on the backside, I knew I was going to sit on it and I was going to wait for that post corner to come back to me if I saw the guy break on a post, right? And I was going to jump that route. And if you jump a route and intercept on the backside of 3-by-1, that's a house call because ain't no quarterback catching me. Any quarterback fast enough to catch me was playing at a higher division, right? So I thought I had this golden opportunity. So here's what ends up happening with this game, right? Game starts. I'm on the kickoff team. We kick the ball off. We go down. I had to look this up because just to get the details of the story right. 5-play drive. We force them to punt. I'm also on the punt return unit. So I'm on kickoff, defense, and then punt return unit. Our offense scores on the first play of the game. Then we have to go out there on kickoff unit again. We give up an 8-play drive, only 16 yards, but an 8-play drive. We force them to punt. Offense goes 3 and out. Next drive, 8-play drive, 33 yards, force them to punt. Again, offense again goes 3 and out. So the next drive comes along. First third down, they come out in a 3-by-1 formation. I'm on the backside, on the solo side. I see the receiver break on the post, and I sit. But at this point in time, I'm so dead-ass tired that I can't get back out there to intercept the ball. All I can do is put myself in position so that when this guy breaks back out on the corner, he just runs over me. I get a pass interference play, and then I have to come out the next play because I'm so freaking tired. And by the time I get to the sideline, I take a knee to catch my breath, and sweat just starts oozing out of my cleats. But my point is, it was so hot and so humid, but I couldn't make my body go. And a moment when you only have so many opportunities for interceptions. You only get so many in your career. So when I had an opportunity to get one, I just could not get my body there, right? So when I'm sitting here in my air-conditioned home watching Nakobe Dean on the very last play of the game, not be able to get to the guy and miss a tackle because he's just a step too slow. At first, I'm sitting there thinking, Nakobe's just too slow. He's got to get to that play. But then I go back and think of my playing days and times when I just didn't have the energy necessary due to extreme circumstances to make some of these plays. And I have a little sympathy. And I do think that this defense will come out better from the bye week and we won't see that same exact performance, right? And I'll end this very long story with this last point because this irks me. This gets to me because that offensive coordinator, he probably got half a hard on when they got that pass interference play because he probably thought he schemed up the perfect play to isolate this corner one-on-one. But I had him. I read them. I knew what they were trying to do. But the thing is, that offense coordinator will never know it because I got the pass interference. But because of my film work, I put myself in position to get a pass interference that only ended up getting 16 yards for the offense. If I had chased that guy inside, I would have been too tired to chase him back outside, and I would have given up a touchdown. So film work pays off. But the heat is a real thing. So don't underestimate it when it comes to playing sports or just life in general. But Eric, let's move on to looking at this team overall. What do you think, looking at this offense, what do you think their weakness is? And do you think this is something that we can overcome and fix during the second half of the season?
Yeah, so first I'll just touch on stuff that is more scheme related in terms of offensive weaknesses. It really, you can hear it from the Eagles fans as well, that not committing to the run game early and often is very frustrating because, especially with all their top wideouts out of the game. We had games where Saquon Barkley had like, didn't he have 0 carries in an entire first quarter a couple weeks ago? Then this past week, yeah, they kept going 3-and-outs and they got behind huge, but he had 2 carries or maybe 2 touches in the first quarter. We talked about it this offseason. You don't want to give this guy 450 touches and burn him out and not have him available or at full strength for the biggest games of the year, hopefully the playoffs. At the same time, they need to use him. It's not like one of these things where, oh, suddenly you're going to charge this guy up in the second half and win games that way. The Eagles have not been front running team, building big leads in a very long time, couple seasons now. So they definitely just need to go to, and it doesn't need to be exotic runs, just some basic runs. I would like to see more pistol. I'd like to see under center get more multiple in the run game. And we talked about their offensive line with the foot speed of the guards is not necessarily built to run a lot of wide runs, but that doesn't mean that's off limits. Like you still gotta manufacture ways to get Barkley the ball, or the other running backs. Those guys can play too. If you're worried about gassing them out, it's in general they're not getting the run game started early in these games. And now the other trick with that is now if you come into the week, you're scripting your first drive and you're going 3-and-out, and it's like, oh, okay, these are the pass concepts that they thought would be good for the defense we like to run. And Tampa, yeah, they have a bunch of exotic pressures, but the coverage shell they're using behind it, it's pretty static. Like they're a heavy cover 3 team. So it is disconcerting that continually the Eagles are not able to score in the first quarter when you should be able to scheme up points. So yeah, so that's my offensive scheme weakness. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with they just haven't come out and given the Saquon the ball early in the game when they knew they were down some of their best weapons on offense. It makes you question, what is the coaching staff thinking? And it makes you question what happens when they get into the playoffs. If they get to the playoffs, are they going to have the game plan necessary to win when the margins are razor thin? So it does have me concerned. And I think part of the issue comes down to what I think is the biggest scheme weakness for this offense. And I think there's a number of things you could say with the scheme that you could point to that, you might want to change or you might not like. But I think when it comes down to the basics of who is even leading this offense, is it Sirianni or is it Kellen Moore? You touched on they've been pretty much 3-and-out in every opening drive that they've had. The only one that wasn't technically a 3-and-out was the Packers game when they threw an interception. Right? Is that a 3-and-out? I don't know the rules on that actually, but are the opening series, they seem very much like their Sirianni scripted opening series. And then you see that they're doing very much a much better job in the second half. So I would think maybe it's Kellen Moore that's running his offense in the second half. But then you look at their touchdown drive when they came out at halftime against the Buccaneers, and the 2 plays that got them, their first 2 plays of the game, there's the same 2 plays in a row as an RPO. They just, first play was the run option, second play was the pass option. That was a staple play that they've been using since the Super Bowl season, right? So that's a Sirianni part of the playbook right there. So the issue with sharing the scheme, and this is something that we talked about a little bit coming into the season, something we probably should have made a bigger point on, is how do these power struggles play out, right? And we see it, or we're talking about it with the opening script, right? But what about other things, right? Because the individual plays are fine, but what about when situational play calling? What about with game flow and trying to set up plays for later? If one guy's sitting here trying to set up a play for the third quarter, and then the other guy steps in the third quarter, says we're running these plays now, well, they kind of waste what you're doing in the first half of the game, right? So just things like that are huge, huge concerns of mine. But did you have any thoughts on on the leadership of this offense?
Yeah, and I just got to go on the record here. I don't believe Sirianni is a bright football mind. In part the role of the coach, especially one who's offensively oriented, is to identify the problems you have and come up with solutions. And now we've seen for a couple seasons now that Sirianni is not able to do so. They have teams bringing cover zero blitzes for 8 weeks in a row, and they draw up a 2-yard out route. They don't understand why Hurts can't play on time, and they're drawing up route combinations where 4 guys are running 10 yards downfield and turning around against man coverage. So I'm very skeptical about Sirianni. Now, listen, we don't know how much he's meddling in the offense, so I'm not going to pretend like I do. We can only use context clues, like you mentioned. They came out and ran a staple play that predated Kellen Moore. Okay, well, we know where that came from. And we've heard anecdotes about there were times where Sirianni did the first one half and Shane Steichen did another half, and then eventually they handed the reins completely off. This guy, he just can't stop meddling. So to me, it's only fair to assume that he is highly active in these meeting rooms and in the game planning. And if that is the case and you put up 0 points in the first quarter, that's an indictment on your ability as a coach. So yeah, I'm very down on him. In fact, I have a tweet that is now gone viral saying I'm eyeing Ben Johnson, and he put up like 42 that night, so it aged pretty well. So we'll see how that goes. I don't view Lurie or Howie as guys who are gonna fire a head coach in the middle of the season, so we'll probably have to wait till the end of the season. Of course, I want him to do well, but the writing is on the wall, and
Yeah, we can save that for we got something coming up in the later part of the podcast to discuss that. We can save it for that part. But did you have personnel wise? What do you think their weakness is personnel wise on the offense?
I don't think they have, when they're healthy, I don't think they have a ton of big weaknesses, but I'm starting to get concerned about some of Hurts' warts that now defenses are really victimizing him for having. I think early on in his career with his legs, better play calling, and him being a little more novel to the league, less films out there on him and the scheme, he's able to get away with some of that stuff. And now I think the book is out on him. Not to say he's figured out and he can't have success. That's not what I'm saying. More just that they have a defined plan of what they want to make Hurts do to beat them. And he's having trouble adjusting to that. Specifically, I feel like he's not playing on time a lot. I mentioned previously they would have route combinations where a bunch of guys are running downfield and turning around. This has been in the NFL since the inception of the league. Okay, it's not like this is a completely bunk concept, but you need to be able to be ready to fire when these guys are coming out of their breaks. It's all timing based. So when Hurts is sitting there scanning the field, bouncing around, and then bailing out to the right, that's not giving those concepts chance to work. The only time he does play on time is when it's an instant quick hitter to the flats as like the first read on a play where it's a quasi run game, essentially, where you're just getting it directly out on a short, high percentage completion. It's a concern, especially with the route combinations that they are using most frequently. Before I go on, do you have any opinions on Hurts kind of playing on time? We know that his time to throw is up there with highest in the league.
Yeah, and to me, I feel like this part of it, I think we can say, is him trying to learn this blended scheme. But we got to, 5 years into the league, I think we got to call a spade, and This is his playing style, right? And that was his playing style coming into the league. And he's improved at it. But I don't think the steps of his improvement are going to be as drastic at this point in his career. I think the steps that he continues to make and the room for him to grow are going to be much smaller steps at this point in time. I still think he's going to continue to grow just at a slower rate. And there's the thing with Jalen, it's hard. It's got to be hard to coach him because there's times where he turns down and doesn't take the the play that as it's supposed to be run, but sometimes it's just a 5-yard hitch route that really doesn't have much chance for a big upside. But the play's probably there to be made, and if it's Kirk Cousins, he probably takes that throw. But because he's Jalen Hurts, he can make bigger plays, so he ends up scrambling and rolling out and creating bigger plays. But then sometimes, especially when they play good defenses, they contain him. Or what they do is they bait him into scrambling to his right. They'll run stunts where it appears like we've given you the edge, but we're waiting for you to scramble and break the pocket because we got someone spying you ready to chase you down, right? So teams are trying to bait him. They know his tendencies. So it's something he's going to have to continue to work at and improve and continue to overcome some of his habits that he's built through his entire playing career. What are you going to say?
Real quick on that, because there was a perfect example from the Bucks game, and I gotta stop coming up with these bad omens because they keep coming true. Where I said Bowles had Hurts number. Now, this isn't groundbreaking stuff. Everyone knows that, but there was a play where the Bucks, they were blitzing, I believe, off the left side, and the Eagles have a screen to the left dialed up, but then what happens is the Bucks end up rolling their like middle coverage players back behind where the blitzer came, because the traditional adage is throw to where the pressure is coming from. And then they ended up tackling the guy before the sticks, and you can see Hurts jumping up and down, being like, "Oh my God, I thought we had the perfect play." And I was just like, man, Bowles is just playing this guy like a fiddle. And now, I'm not one to say Hurts can't process or can't read a defense. We know that's not true. In fact, in pre-snap recognition, he's been one of the best. But I think it is pretty surface level. It's like he sees a picture and that's what he believes it is, and is not. If that picture changes, I don't necessarily know if he has that second order critical thinking where he can now problem solve on the fly and realize, oh, okay, they actually baited me. Now I got to go and do this. So that's going to be where I go to Kellen Moore and I say, hey, you got to go and sit in a room with this guy and talk about what are these defensive coordinators trying to do to you? How can we be prepared for that? And when it does materialize on the field, we have a counterpunch. So
I'm sure they. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure they. I'm sure they do. But when instincts kick in, right, and your entire, for 15 of your 20 years you've been playing football, you've been able to scramble and create bigger plays, and still in the NFL are able to do it. Well, you can see why the guy goes off script a little bit and turns into playmaker. But moving on to what I thought was the biggest offensive personnel issue, or not to overlap with, some of the stuff that you were saying. I went a different route, but I will say this. I didn't want to make this my point because you just talked about Jalen, but the turnovers are absolutely a huge issue. Those have to stop. They cannot win games if they continue losing the turnover battle, and they won't beat good teams if they continue losing the turnover battle. Now, looking at my weakness from this personnel standpoint, I think it's the backup tight ends. And really, in particular, in the run game, these guys are getting blown up, and it's ruining plays, and it's really becoming an issue when they want to go to 12 personnel. And that's a bigger issue now. It's what's the word for it? It's amplified by the fact that they're without AJ and Devontae, right? So they're trying to use more 12 and 13 personnel groupings, but Calcaterra hasn't been good. Stoll wasn't good when he came back, predictably, right? It's really ruining some plays. There was a play against the Saints. It should have been a huge play for Saquon Barkley. They dialed up a speed option against a blitz. Perfect play call. But Calcaterra doesn't recognize who he's supposed to be blocking, and he blocks the read guy. And so the guy that he should have been blocking is now unblocked and a free hitter and is able to tackle. I think it was Saquon ends up getting tackled, right? Just little plays like that. But then plays where they just can't straight up stand their ground and block consistently enough. It's hard to block as a tight end. It's when you go and you look at the blocking of tight ends throughout the league, it's not very good. Ours are just at the bottom of that level from these backups, right? So I think it is an issue, especially it's something that really is an issue that almost forces you to live in 11 personnel when AJ and Devontae are healthy. But Eric, what's your thoughts on their backup tight ends?
Horrible. And this was one of the reasons I think we both might have left Calcaterra off our 53. Unfortunately, Albert O got hurt. I do wonder if he would have had the chance to be the tight end too had he not got hurt. Not that he's a good blocker.
Look like it from
yeah, not that he's a good blocker either. It's bizarre because we talked about it in the offseason. Not only would Kellen Moore run 12 personnel, he would run 13 personnel. And they only have one NFL caliber tight end. So I agree with you. I think they probably have to go away from that. You're not fooling anyone. I think there are some teams that they'll get in 12 personnel and throw every single time. So unless the Eagles want to start doing that, you could probably throw that in the bin. Now, here's the trick with it is who's going out there instead. So you either have Dotson, who Hurts isn't targeting even when he gets in. I wonder how much of it is like, does Dotson know the playbook completely? The plays look like they're there to be made, at least from what I could see. Or Johnny Wilson. Now, here's the thing. I wrote this on Twitter. I genuinely believe this. I believe Johnny Wilson's a better blocker than Calcaterra. Now, am I going to put him in line and start blocking edge rushers and linebackers? Absolutely not. No. I don't think he's a tight end. But you might as well put him out there because he's probably more of a receiving threat than Calcaterra anyway. And now you can start to throw some of those quick passes to the edge and get real blocking. It is astounding how many times the Eagles over the past couple of years will throw screens with one blocker out there who's 180 pounds or two blockers who are combined 360 pounds. That doesn't work, period. The defensive backs, they're pretty much, for the most part, are physical enough to play through blocks from skinny receivers. And we talked about it, even AJ at times, he's capable of decleating defensive backs, but the technique or him being over aggressive leaves something to be desired in blocking at times. So it's kind of a weird recipe where you have a coaching staff who likes throwing bubble screens, and then you don't necessarily have the polish and the execution to pull that off, or the personnel. So that's problematic, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think they could probably use Calcaterra in space, but when he's going against defensive linemen and even linebackers, other times where he's just getting thrown around. But flipping to the defensive side of the ball, let's look at some of the weaknesses there. Eric, what did you think from schematic-wise? I guess there's a lot of things that I'm sure people will point to. So what do you think is the biggest issue in terms of their scheme?
Well, it's is another tricky thing because it's trying to distill between, is it the scheme or are the players not executing what they're being told? And frankly, I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that fully. But yeah, they're just not matching routes properly. There's communication busts all the time. You can see it blatantly on film. Maddox going like this, passing off the routes, and then no one is picking up the guy who's trying to pass off, and then both guys end up running free. And then if they are playing soft, this is one of the big criticisms from Eagles fans. You have your corners 10 yards off. Well, if you're playing like aggressive, sitting on routes and coming up to the line of scrimmage, you can play from depth. But when you're ceding ground and then letting Sterling Shepard run a 10-yard out route where you have 0% chance of being able to make a play on the ball, now playing from depth becomes problematic. So these are things that take time. Quinyon Mitchell, we love him, but he has some things he needs to work on technique-wise. Being communication in the secondary, that takes time to really get honed in. Now, here's the trick. We might be switching out secondary players. Sidney Brown comes in. Cooper DeJean comes in. Well, now you're back to ground zero for the communication stuff. And it's these nickel defenders with communicating with, the outside corners, with the safeties. These are the players that are involved in all those communications. So the plan was for Fangio to be here for 4 or 5 years. And you got to wonder if they think it'll take a couple years to really get some cohesiveness with the unit. So that's what I see as a big weakness. But once again, I'm not necessarily attributing it specifically to scheme. So how about for you?
Yeah, and it did take the Dolphins a little bit to get going. There was a period of time where they started the first, 4 or so games of the year last year, and they were one of the worst defenses in the league. Then they were one of the hottest defenses in the league in the middle half of the year until they started having, all their players go down to injury, and then it really started falling apart towards the end of the season. So there is hope that maybe it's just the system's very complex and these guys aren't picking it up. When I look at scheme versus talent issues, to me, anyone that's watched the podcast, especially the preview or review podcast from the Bucks game, I think it's a lot more of the players are not executing the scheme right now. To me, it's not so much that these guys are just being completely and physically outmatched. It's that they're not, just like what you're saying, they're not executing their assignments that they're supposed to be. They're not aligning correctly with motion. They're not aligning correctly to the receivers in front of them. What you just said about Quinyon Mitchell giving up a ton of space to receiver and playing an off coverage, a lot of people attribute that to scheme and playing off coverage. To me, that's more of a technique issue. You're not supposed to play off coverage, start 10 yards off the ball, and then just bail right away, and then lose your leverage, your outside leverage, when the receiver's already starting from a very inside split, right? That's a technique issue, not a scheme issue. You still need to be able to play off coverage in the NFL because NFL offenses will force you into situations where you do have to play off coverage from time to time, right? So there's a play from the Raiders that I posted from last year during the summer when the offseason was slow, and it really showed the differences of 2 corners on the same team playing the same coverage, both playing off coverage. One corner plays with good technique, and he's playing tight on his receiver from off coverage, right? The other corner is playing loose, bails right away, and gives up a ton of space. Same coverage, different technique from the corners, different results, right? But looking at what I think is the biggest issue scheme-wise, I think what you said is the biggest issue, but not to overlap with what you're saying, I think one of the biggest gripes I have with this scheme is that they just live on the disguise too much. So they'll give up and they'll sacrifice space and matchups for the disguise. They'll sit in their too high shell sometimes to a fault, trying to hold the rotation or the disguise of what they're trying to do. And then a player is late to rotate and it's giving up a little bit more space than if they had just gotten down and played closer to them from the start. Then when they have to close space and tackle, it makes it a little bit harder for these guys. These are plays that they still should be making. And these coverages that Fangio runs, they are taken over the NFL. There's a reason why scoring is way down, why teams are running way more, why passing yards are way down. And it's because of these style of coverages. Other teams are running these coverages and still having success. Other teams are able to hold their disguise, come down late, and still make these tackles. So you can still do that. But sometimes, if that is going to be an issue for your personnel, this is something where Fangio may need to see that we may need to do a little less disguise and just get into better alignment pre-snap so that these guys are in a little better position to execute their assignments. But Eric, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing that I do think you could directly attribute to coaches, which is the fronts. Now we saw they had a amazing success against the Saints, but the Saints have such a defined offensive identity that the Eagles could go all in, push all the chips in with those, 6-1 and 5-2 fronts, and it was very effective. And then they kind of went back to what they were doing previously against the Bucks, and that is concerning because against these teams that spread it out a little bit more or run more traditional shotgun offenses, we're going to be in those four-man fronts, and there's no evidence that we can fit the run well from those fronts. So I I got to say I don't necessarily know the solution unless it's improving your personnel, but that's something that I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and even the thing is they did use some of their fronts they were using against the Saints, and I talked about in the review episode. I think the team has fundamental issues. So when you change the fronts and you change the coverages and you call different plays, your fundamental issues will still show up, and they still showed up when they switched their fronts. They still weren't fitting the run correctly, or weren't aligning correctly pre-snap, which put them in a bad position post-snap to make a play, or they weren't aligning correctly when a team motioned, right? So those fundamental issues still show up when you change your front or change your coverage or change the plays that you're running. So they're going to have to get that figured out. But I think that will get better with time. But now flipping to what you think the biggest issue is defensively with their personnel, what would you say that is?
Wow, I mean, how long do we have? But for me, it's hard for me to say. I mean, there's so many issues. I'm stumped. Like,
It's a good answer.
yeah, it really. I'll just hone in on a few players. So Gardner Johnson. I mean, the guy is out of position. He's blowing assignments. Obviously, he's missing record numbers of tackles. And for someone with such a boisterous personality, that just can't feel good if you're a teammate of his, where he's supposed to be the vocal leader and a playmaker, and then having these continuous breakdowns. That's problematic. Nakobe Dean, he's trying out there. Except for that Mike Evans crosser. He just didn't try. I think this goes back to your Heat thing. He was completely out of gas at that point. But he doesn't have the range. Even if he's in position, it's like he's short armed and can't quite make the tackle. If stuff is happening behind him, he might as well not be on the field because he doesn't have good instincts in coverage. One other player I'll highlight is Maddox. It's it's one of these tricky things, chicken or the egg, where it's like if Maddox is telling one of our young corners, you can see it blatantly on film with Ringo and Quinyon, hey, I want you to take this guy and I'm gonna take the guy who's going underneath, and they're not switching it off. Maybe we can blame the young guys. They're just like getting tunnel vision on their own guy. Now, what I've noticed is offenses, they also know the match rules that Fangio's using. So they'll run an in-breaker that has a stem that is ambiguous in terms of is it a vertical or not. Oh, do I match this or not? It's right at that cutoff point, whether it's considered vertical. So maybe you massage the rules to make it more clearly defined for Quinyon to be able to match those. But that's where communication, and not only communication, but synergy amongst the players becomes paramount because there's unspoken language based off how these routes are developing, the speed and the actual players that are running these routes. Do I feel like this guy is going to pass this off? That matters. And that takes time. So, but in terms of just individual breakdowns, poor tackling in space, not fitting the run well. I do have problems with Maddox. And ironically, one of the reasons I didn't want to bring him back was because I said he was completely unreliable due to injury. Now he's available and he's unreliable because of how he looks physically. So who are your problematic players you've identified?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on all of them. I didn't identify a specific player. Really, I think the entire back seven, so everyone outside of their defensive line, is just really not playing on the same page right now. And you touched on it in our previous segment when we were touching on their scheme issues. But I mean, just blown coverages, not playing with proper leverage when they are in coverage, not passing off routes properly, not aligning properly, particularly with motion, not knowing where the run fit is, particularly with motion, bad pursuit angles, bad tackling. The defense isn't going to be better unless the back seven gets better. They have to be better, or it's just going to be issues all season long. So, and it's really making the front look worse than what it is. I think they're being hung out to dry because when they do, close off gaps or slant in certain directions, they are opening up alleys for their second level players to fill and get unblocked opportunities. Their run fits are designed to get multiple unblocked defenders to the ball, but they're not executing it properly for that to take place. So to me, that's the biggest issue personnel wise. It's just the entire back seven is not on the same page. So, but flipping to, we don't want to be Negadelphians too much, right? It's been a tough start to the year, so we know you guys wanted to start with the weaknesses, but what are some of the strengths that we can lean into as we come out of the bye week? What can this team really hone in on and surround themselves with to push and rally behind to win games and be successful? Eric, what do you think is the strength of this offense from a scheme perspective?
When they do run the ball, I actually like how they're executing it. Now, I always want more razzle dazzle, more window dressing, fast motion at the snap, ball fakes, stuff like this, just to try to freeze the linebackers or get them flowing the wrong way. So I could always use more of that. But the way it's been pretty well executed, and I've liked their designs. And the other thing is the underneath passing game. I mean, as much as it is painful to watch their offense at times, they have strung together, especially between the 20s, quite a few drives where they were able to just have put a bunch of short passes 4 or 5 yards at a time together and move the sticks. Now, there's nothing to it. To me, it's more of an extension of the run game. And I'd actually like more quick hitters that are more in the style of a true passing game. And we've seen they've had success with these mesh concepts and stuff like this. So I'd like to see more of that. But yeah, I think the underneath passing game looks good. And this is something we touched on with Kellen Moore, that it's something he favors. And, I call him a kitchen sink coordinator. He's got everything at his disposal. I mean, this guy, I'm sure he whittles his play sheet down on game day, but that playbook's got to be gigantic. So it's something that I mentioned, Hurts not playing on time. That is an opportunity to improve the offense, because we do see Moore has a lot of these quick game passing concepts that are effective. Well, you need a quarterback who plays quick on time, gets the ball out without trying to hunt for the big play for those to actually matter. So how about for you?
Yeah, I thought looking at the offense, and you touched on a little bit, but just the run game really and what they're doing in the run game. I really like the formations they're using to influence certain defenders into the run game, oftentimes a nickel corner or the outside corner. And then oftentimes I like what they're doing with motion as well to also influence specific defenders into the run fit. And often, here's the thing with the NFL defenses. They're, for the most part, they're pretty good with their run fits. So they're able to get an unblocked defender to the football. They're able to funnel the ball to their unblocked defender, right? But the Eagles are doing is making sure that the unblocked defender is oftentimes your worst tackler. So it could be the nickel corner, or oftentimes it's the slot corner. It could be the safety, but they're doing a good job of trying to make sure it's not a linebacker, right? So I like some of the stuff that they're doing there. And then they'll use those same principles in the quarterback run game. We really saw this play out against, I think it was the Falcons game, or maybe it was the Saints game. I think it was the Falcons game. But it adds an extra layer of stress to the defense when you then have to account for all the things they're doing to force their worst tacklers into the run fit. They're now then adding the quarterback as an extra player into the run games to put you down a gap in the run game. This is going to be huge come the fourth quarter and in playoffs when you really start to open up and let Jalen use his legs. Right now, it seems a lot of their quarterback run game is more predicated on some read options, which I think I'll have a video out about it soon. They kind of need to redesign some of that stuff. But those plays tend to go more towards the sideline and can save him some hits or allow him to be in a better position to protect himself, as opposed to running quarterback draw plays or quarterback power plays that go up the middle of the field. When you get to the playoffs and you're not as much worried about injury to Jalen, and you can start running these plays all game and not wait till the fourth quarter like we saw against the Falcons in week 2 of the NFL season, right? That's going to be a huge bonus for this team. And it's part of that package that you get with Jalen Hurts. Yeah, he doesn't play on time a lot in the pass game, but he gives you this added element that Kirk Cousins can't give you, that Joe Burrow can't give you, right? So just he brings something that gives you that added bonus that a lot of other quarterbacks can't bring.
Real quick on that, there's narratives about Hurts' running ability, and it's clear as day he doesn't have the same ability to cut or move laterally that he once did. But when he's north-south, he's 95% of what he always was. We saw it on that QB lead play you're talking about, where they have a bunch of guys funnel like through the A or B gap, and he just goes behind and ran for 1,000,000 yards. Those are great plays, and I would expect them to have success on them. So the kind of what you're talking about, the reason they're not using that over and over again is they need to preserve their $250 million quarterback. I understand that, but hopefully as the game starts to mean more, they'll lean on that a bit. We saw Hurts take off the governor and run wild a couple of weeks ago, so it's in there. But yeah, I think what you mentioned, they got to can or change those RPOs because that ain't working.
Yeah, think about it like this. He is David Montgomery to Lamar Jackson is Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of their style of running. That's kind of how Jalen is, right? Sometimes people are like, Jalen's lost a lot of his juice. If to be honest, for a quarterback, yes, he is fast, but he ran a 4.59 at the combine. A lot of linebackers are faster than him. So, and that was at the combine, not him 5 years later, where he's probably not as fast as he was then. So there were plays like last year, Jamin Davis chased him down. He ran I think a 4.40. He's a much faster player than Hurts. He's not a guy where read options really aren't his strength of his running game. It's the quarterback power game, the power running, downhill running, I think is strength of his run game. So great point, Eric. Now switching to strength of this offense in terms of their personnel, what would you say from a personnel standpoint through the first 4 weeks of the season is the strength of this offense?
The offensive line. We talked about it repeatedly. This is the best unit on the team. They've been consistent every week. Good performance. Now, yeah, they got cover 0 blitzes from every single direction from Bowles, but ultimately, I'm not putting the blame on the offensive line. I think they've done a really good job. And Saquon. The main thing I talked about the benefit of adding Saquon this offseason is that he's a multi-dimensional back that will make the Eagles less predictable because he can pass, protect, catch, and run inside and out. But he has improved what we identified as weaknesses when he was with the Giants. At times, showing really poor vision, at juking against ghosts for no reason when he could be getting upfield. not you letting his blocks develop, trying to run through a guy even when he's in open space, things like this. And I think he's improved a lot. Now we've seen a few times of like poor vision. Ultimately, it's still the same guy, but the fact that he's be able to get past the line of scrimmage before he has to worry about a defender, as opposed to 2 yards in his own backfield, is making a dramatic difference. I'd like him to channel a little bit of the Noshan Moreno mold, where he's just north south like a bullet and running as hard as he can at times. Yes, there are times where he can use his jump cuts and get outside. That's fine, but a little bit more north south, because his speed and power are up there with any back in the NFL. So he's been a revelation. And obviously AJ Brown. I've pretty much penciled him in as one of the top receivers in the NFL, if not the very best. And it's just funny to see how poorly the offense runs when he's not there. So yeah, that's what I think are the obvious strengths of this team. How about for you?
Yeah, I'd go offensive line. I think they've just been really impressive overall. Cam Jurgens, PFF has him ranked as their number 6 center on the year. He's looked really good. I know sometimes people don't like PFF, and I get it, but he has looked really good, and I agree with him on this grade here. Run game, pass game. Has he been perfect? No, but he's been a lot better than what he was at guard. To be fair, this is his first time at guard, but he's just been a lot better back at his natural position. Overall, as a team, they've been really good in the run game. They open up massive holes. Yes, Saquon has been much better with his vision. He has been better with his vision, running more decisively, right? But he's also had huge holes to run through. They've done a really good job of making his life easier. Pairing that scheme with Barkley is a formula for success for them long term, going for the rest of the season. And it's going to be huge in the playoffs. Running the ball, especially in cold weather environments, right? Running the ball in the red zone when things tighten up and the goal line. He has shown a much better ability to be able to power through tight spaces, to be able to punch these runs into the end zone instead of falling down at the 1 yard line, much to the dismay of my fantasy team, since I have Jalen Hurts on it. But, all of that together is going to be huge if they make it to the playoffs, being able to close out games with this offensive line and Saquon Barkley. And Pass Pro, they've been one of the best in the NFL. If you look at their pressure rate allowed, Next Gen Stats has them at 20th. A number of other sites has them pretty high as well. A lot of that is due to Fred Johnson giving up a number of pressures. Landon Dickerson actually has given up a fair amount of pressures as well. But here's what I'll say. Their time to throw is 31st in the NFL. So second longest in the NFL. Only the 49ers are higher than them. So Jalen is holding on to the ball a lot. So he invites some of this pressure as well. It's just part of his play style. But their time to pressure, so when they do allow pressure, is 6th best. So yeah, they are giving up, I guess, a higher rate of pressure, but they're giving it up at a slower rate. But really, a lot of the times they're giving up that pressure is probably more so has to do with Jalen holding onto the ball a little too long, and also having Fred Johnson in there as well. And then there's a couple plays against the Buccaneers where they were able to scheme up some unblocked looks as well. But overall, I think this offensive line's just done a good job.
Real quick on that, and I wonder if you've noticed this as well, because to me it shows up on tape glaringly, which is they'll be running these plays where Jalen's sitting back there for 5 seconds and clean pocket. There will be one of their running backs who's just kind of floated out to the flats, and there's nobody within 15 yards of him, and Jalen doesn't even remotely think about looking in his direction, let alone throwing it. I can't even imagine how many yards that we've not gained because of not looking at checkdowns. And almost every single one of Kellen Moore's passing concepts has one of these built in there. It's not like they're like, even if they keep their running back in, then eventually they'll like block and release. It's rare they're going to true like 7 or 8 man protections. So I see this as problematic because they're leaving so much money on the table. Do you think I'm accurate in this or not?
Yeah, that's just Jalen's play style. He's not a guy that wants to get to the check down. He'd rather scramble or he'd rather extend to try and hit a big play further down the field. So they do leave stuff on the table, but let's see if Jalen can continue to grow and add this to his game, because it's something that he will need to do as he progresses throughout his career and as he gets older, because he can't stay as a quarterback that continues to take as many hits as he takes with his play style. But switching to the defensive side of the ball, what did you see as the strength of this defense from a schematic standpoint? And I understand this might be hard to answer at this point in time, but what did you see?
Yeah, I got three quick things. So the first thing is their heavy fronts, 5 and 6 man fronts versus the runs look really good. And against teams that run a lot of under center, I think they'll be successful in employing that. Pass deflections, I do view this as a scheme thing to some extent because we've seen it in previous years. It's something I mentioned this offseason. The Eagles never got pass deflections. I watch other teams, and they're batting down a couple balls every week. Now they're doing it. So I got to think that's coaching. Now, if the pass rush isn't getting there, that stinks. But at least you can make up for it to some degree if you're batting 3-4 passes down. And red zone defense. And I'd love to hear you kind of detail this a little bit more in depth. But it seems like they're running a lot of like cover one. But typically in cover one, you're having that middle high safety just chill in a deep zone. But when the field is condensed in the red zone, that's not really necessary. So they're able to play with that guy and move him all around to take away the top threats of the defense. Now, unfortunately, on the Olave and Mike Evans touchdown, that didn't happen. I think teams are starting to realize the Eagles are leaning heavily on certain red zone coverages. But just wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, they're definitely taking that post safety, and oftentimes what they're doing is they're bracketing a certain predetermined player before the snap, and essentially they're switching off the coverage. So whoever is the guy that's playing man coverage over that receiver, when that receiver, if they break over the middle of the field, then that post safety will take that receiver, that player, that defender that was covering that receiver and man coverage will then zone off and look for work. So it's something that they've done. We're not the only team that does it. We've done it in the past couple of seasons as well. You'll see other teams, what they'll do is they'll take their post safety and they'll move it to the side of the running back when we're in shotgun, because they use that player as a quarterback player and the read option game. So the Eagles, I hate when they run read option and the red zone, because that post safety is just an extra quarterback player. But looking at what I think I have two things that I put that are what I think are strengths schematically. This is going to sound crazy, right? This is going to sound crazy to people when I say this. But their run fits are designed to get multiple unblocked defenders to the ball. When I was sitting there in the offseason and I was watching the Dolphins run defense, I was sitting there and I was like, wow, this is awesome. This is a lot of fun to watch. Part of me was a little concerned because their edge defenders are much better in run defense than ours, although that hasn't actually been that big of an issue this year. That really hasn't been the issue for our defense this year. But I was sitting there like, wow, this is a fun defense to watch. And then I'm sitting there this year and I'm like, wow, this defense looks like shit. We are not running this scheme how it's supposed to be run at all. So if they can get to the point in time where they are running the scheme the way it's supposed to be run, the run defense is going to look like a lot of fun. You're going to see opportunities where guys are flying through the line of scrimmage, unblocked, getting tackles for loss. You're going to see plays where the run gets cut off, the linebacker falls back into the play, unblocked, and you get two unblocked defenders tackling the running back, right? So hopefully we can get to that point in time, but we're not seeing it right now. I will add into this as well. Someone put in the comment for the last video, I was told we'd get a lot of unblocked pressures. Where are they? We've been getting them. We haven't been capitalizing for the most part. So first of all, we've had limited opportunities to get these pressures because of our early down issues, not being able to stop teams on early down issues, not being able to stop them from getting first downs on first down. That's a huge issue, right? So if you're constantly letting the offense play ahead of the sticks, you can't use your exotic stunts and pressures. So you shouldn't expect to get a ton of unblocked looks until they start playing better on first down. Having said that, Zach Bond, sack against the Packers, unblocked. Jordan Davis, sack against the Saints, unblocked pick stunt. Zach Bond, unblocked pressure, tipped a pass against the Bucks. Nakobe Dean hesitates in man coverage, ball's caught in the flat, running back runs up the sideline for like 12 yards. Okay, so unblocked pressure. Got to make the plays though. Jalen Carter, pick stunt, comes unblocked against the Bucks, but ball gets out of Baker's hands in like 2.5 seconds. So doesn't matter. And then BG had a sack against the Bucks, unblocked as well. They're getting some of these unblocked pressures and sacks, but until you get into play better on early downs and get into longer down and distance situations on second and third down, don't expect to see a bunch of unblocked pressures. But switching to defensive personnel wise, what do you see as a strength through the first 4 weeks?
I still think Jalen Carter is amazing. I'm starting to realize, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that I don't necessarily think he's a perfect scheme fit, especially for like this gap and a half stuff. You want Jalen Carter to pretty much tell him, get in the backfield as quickly as possible and wreak havoc, because he can pretty much just club a guard across and beat him to either side fairly frequently. So yeah, I think he's awesome. But yeah, when he's freelancing, trying to make plays out there and then not playing his gaps, that's causing big issues. Especially, you mentioned it, we're not having the linebackers who are able to patch mistakes like that. And Mitchell, I of course, it's not going to be perfect. We talked earlier in the episode about a really bad rep he had, and he got cooked on the final drive against the Falcons. So it's not perfect. But all the signs are encouraging. The mistakes, to me, are very fixable. I just love his wiring. He's going and talking trash to Mike Evans, but it's not a CJ Gardner-Johnson style trash. It's more of a quiet, reserved, like, I'm like this. So I'm loving that. And Zach Bond, yes, it's been a roller coaster up and down, but the impact plays he has made have been so needed because, frankly, the defense hasn't had playmakers. Him and Reed Blankenship are the guys who are making the impact plays pretty much, and Carter. So, yeah, you'd like more consistency from him, but for what they paid, they're getting an amazing production. So that's who I've identified. What do you think?
Yeah, so pretty much same stuff. So Quinyon was one of mine, and then I put interior defensive line overall, just as a unit, I think has been pretty good. There's been ups and downs from both of these units, and really, then when you're looking at the defense, you're kind of stuck on who to pick because this entire unit has been up and down, with really the only up being the Saints game, right? So you're kind of picking between a unit or a player that's had up and down performances to begin with. So they did have, particularly the Falcons game, I would say their interior defensive line unit struggled that game. But outside of that, I think they've been a solid unit. Quinyon as well has had his ups and had his downs, but he is a rookie, so it's a little bit more forgivable. But like you say, his attitude, his fearlessness, his confidence to play the position, on top of his athleticism and his ability to play the position in general, is huge. I think he's got a little bit of hip tightness, but he can overcome that with his burst and his explosiveness, right? So and that's huge. Now, in terms of the Jalen Carter, is he a good scheme fit for this defense? Someone asked me, they asked in the comments, why do certain defenses run, have their defensive line just attack off the snap and penetrate right away versus reacting to the offensive lineman and the block in front of them? Because by reacting to the block in front of you and then playing the block, it actually allows you to play the run better. You can fit off of the offensive lineman's movement better. Versus when you penetrate, you can create disruption, but you can also create situations where you get out of position pretty easily. Or there will be times where teams will take advantage of that and they'll run trap plays, they'll run draw plays, they'll run screens, they'll run plays that can use your aggressiveness against you. Everything that you do has a pro and a con in football, right? It just, do you understand what the weakness is of the coverage that you're running or the technique that you're using, so that you know how offenses will try and attack you, so that you can be prepared to take some of that stuff away. The Eagles defense right now, because they can't even run their coverages at a base level, aren't at the 301 level of running this defense. They got to get to the 101 level before they can do any of that advanced stuff. But we have one more segment we want to get to. It'll be a little bit quicker here as we've gone a little bit long on time, but we wanted to get to the true false segment. And we have 3 topics here where we're going to get to. And I think this can kind of encapsulate where we're at through the first 4 weeks of the season. So, Eric, true or false? Eagles defense can finish top 15 without a trade.
False. Absolutely false. We've discussed all the reasons why. Here's the deal. Could they be playing like a top 16 unit at the end of the year? Yes. But the average across the season, there's no way. So that's why I do think they would need to make a trade. So, yeah, before elaborating any further, I want to see your answer.
I would say true. I would say they can. Now, will they? Probably not. But I would say, in terms of the question that was phrased, Eagles defense can finish top. Questions should read top 16, not top 15. I apologize. I think they can. Right? The thing right now is they're just not executing the scheme that they're running. So if they do start executing it, I think they do have enough talent to be a better defense, to be a top half of the league defense. It might be 16 or 15. It might not be, 8 or 9. Right? But you look at the Saints game, they dominated them, and they were the hottest team coming into that game, right? And then they put up a lot of yards against the Falcons this past week. So the defense had dominant moments. I think they can have more dominant moments. You see some positives. You see some things you can build on. Jalen Carter up front, right? Quinyon Mitchell is going to house one of these passes eventually. He's going to get his hands on them one of these times, right? I don't think CJ is going to continue to play this bad. A lot of what we saw against the Bucs, I think some of it is due to the heat issues. So I think they can play a little bit better. And I think some of the personnel changes and then just playing as one unit, I think can solve a lot of their issues, because they're just not playing as one right now. And if you're not playing as one, you're playing as none. So for that reason, I think the answer is true, but I don't think it probably won't happen. Now, moving on to the second topic. Eagles offense will finish top 10. True or false?
True. AJ Brown comes back after the bye. Devontae comes back. Lane Johnson comes back. They're a great offense. Even with Sirianni's incompetence, there's a good enough personnel, good enough line, Kellen Moore, that they will score. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not as concerned about teams bringing the house every single play. I think they've demonstrated that they'll have answers to that. Now, when you have no receivers, that's tough. So I don't necessarily blame them for the Bucs game. And I will take a victory lap on this. My bold prediction was that we would see the highest blitz percentage on passing downs of any game this season. That's came true. So obviously, there's still a lot of the season to go, but so far that's true. So none of that surprised me. So yeah, I will say I'm not worried about the offense. Are you?
Yeah, I'd say true as well. I think they can finish top 10. Now, what does top 10 mean? Are we going points or yards? To me, it doesn't matter. I think they finished top 10 in both. They're currently 7th in yards now, and they've been without AJ Brown for 3 of the 4 games. And Devontae was out last game as well, and they're still 7th in yards right now. So having both of them back, when they come back healthy, I think, sky's the limit. They're going to put up yards. They're going to get yards. They're 15th in points currently, again, without AJ. I think that will go up when he gets back. I think that will go up when they truly figure out what they are best at as a team and as everyone gets more comfortable with this offense. But I think the bigger issue isn't really the season-long rank. I think it's individual moments and games, right? So turnovers that kill drives when you need to get momentum. fumbling the ball on a play where you have pressure in your face, you evade it, and then the window to throw the pass is already done. It's already gone. So even if you throw it, would have ended up as an interception, right? Plays like that have to get eliminated. So I don't think it's about where they end up as a season-long rank. For all I care, they could end up at first in points and yards. But if they're going to continue having turnover issues, or they're going to continue having issues where they can't put together the game plan to get out to a start where they don't end up down 21 points, well, then I don't think it really matters where they rank. But the last true false question. Nick Sirianni will get fired at the end of the season.
True. And I think it's a twofold reason. Number one, continually not having solutions to problems the team has faced. Number two, a potentially amazing candidate on the market or multiple in Ben Johnson, in Bobby Slowick, for the defensive truthers out there, Brian Flores. Now, the question is, will they mesh with the front office? I have no idea, but I'm going to go with true. And how about you?
I'm going to go with false, selfishly, because that means it's going to be a bad season. And then that means I probably have to put out content for the next 12 or so weeks that really sucks to make and gets no viewership because no one's excited about the season anymore. So selfishly, I'm going to say false, but my head says probably true. Even if they make the playoffs, I still think he could be fired. If they go one and done, or even if they win one game and then they just get demolished the next game, I just could see them moving on. Because like what you said, when you look back at Sirianni's tenure, where are we at from when he got hired? Right? Is Jalen Hurts better than he was in 2021? We just played the Buccaneers again. Did Jalen look like a much improved quarterback from back then? I don't know, right? The team's dealing with internal turmoil. I can't talk. The team is dealing with internal turmoil. All right, well, I'm never putting that sentence into the notes again. I can't say it. Right? But they're dealing with issues internally. Part of that falls back to your leadership. Right? Not all of it is put on one guy. But these are issues that, like, we dealt with some of this stuff last year as well, right? Whispers from the locker room of issues coming out, right? It doesn't appear that he has support from the outside looking in. Like, you look at the things Jalen says and how he talks about him, doesn't feel like he really supports him. He twists himself into a pretzel on 3rd and 4th downs. Those issues, like with the blitz, have been issues for his entire career, were issues last year. Like, those things should have been taken care of. Just at the end of the day, sometimes it's just time for a reset. And I feel like we're getting to that point. Now, my only concern for that is Jalen has made light of this past offseason of how many offensive coordinators that he's had to deal with throughout his career. What is the Eagles' plan at that point in time? Do they really want to put him through that again? Because at that point in time, at a certain point in time, it is also front office malpractice to continually change offensive coordinators on him. So would it be a situation where potentially they bring in Kellen Moore and, like you said, maybe it's a Flores hire to replace? That'd be a complete 180 from Fangio, right? To go to Flores, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But we're going to end this podcast with a couple of trade candidates to keep an eye out for as we get into trade season. Now, keep in mind, trade deadline has been pushed back this year. I believe it's been pushed back a week. But trade talks are going to start heating up. It's that time of this year where every single player on a bad team is going to be linked to the Eagles. But Eric, you have a couple names for some trade candidates?
Yeah, I wanted to keep it somewhat realistic, so I picked older players on bad teams. And the ones I've identified are Jadeveon Clowney, edge, who could moonlight inside for the Panthers. Obviously, they're pretty much tanking, although they've looked much better with Andy Dalton in there, ironically. But if they keep free falling, I don't see why he would be off limits. And you talk about setting the edge. I mean, this guy is up there with you know, not any edge rusher, but he's near elite status in setting the edge, and that's much needed. And he's got a little bit of pass rush juice. Now, it's more of like a collapse the pocket and hope someone else makes the sack, but that's also needed because the Eagles, they just continue to have discordance in their pass rush. Now, of course, Baker got it out in a millisecond, but in previous games, we just saw you need to have everyone working together. And the other guy is Calais Campbell. For people who are fans of the show, they know I kept talking about him this offseason. If the Dolphins don't get Tua back soon, they're pretty much have no hope at all. And then you wonder, is he going to try to find a Super Bowl candidate team? Not necessarily. I don't know if the Eagles fall in that category right now, but that would be someone I'd love because number one, he's a veteran presence and we need those on our defense. He's got a little bit of pass rush juice. If people saw him in the primetime game, he had a sack. And he's good against the run. I think, that would be a great addition. Who do you think?
Yeah, I'll just 2 points about the players you named. We definitely, and for all the teams that we talk about today, you really need to monitor these teams because the teams that we're talking about are going to be bad teams. They're bad now, but what if they start to get hot? Then these players might be off the list. Like you mentioned, if the Dolphins get Tua back, then Calais Campbell's, they're not going to be shopping him unless he comes back and they just lose every game he comes back in. And then you look at the Panthers are playing much better with Andy Dalton. So maybe they think they can get back and be a little bit competitive with him. So keep an eye out for how these teams are playing. Maybe there's a couple teams that are 3-1 right now that end up falling off a cliff, and we can start looking at some of those players as players that teams might be looking to unload. But what you said, for the same reason, I looked at the same criteria: older players on bad teams, because those are the players that are most likely to be traded. You touched on some defensive players. I really looked at linebacker because I think that that's an area of concern to a degree. I don't really know, I don't know how much is really out there from what I saw from my brief grazing or look at the linebackers out there. But tight end is really where I focused on because of what I said. Tight end's an issue. Their second tight end. And it might not be that big of an issue to say your tight end 2 is probably only going to play maybe 30% of your snaps at most, right? But in big moments, in big games, one play here or there could change the outcome of games. You want to have the best players ready for those positions. So for that reason, 2 players that I picked: Austin Hooper from New England. The Patriots are probably going to continue being bad all year long. So I think this is probably a safe one that he'll be a trade candidate for a team that's looking for some help at tight end. He's currently 12th in PFF's run block grade. So I think he could be a guy that could come in and be an upgrade over Calcaterra in terms of his run blocking. And then Nick Van at tight end from Tennessee. He's not I wouldn't say he's the world's best blocker, but he is a solid blocker for a tight end at the position. So, and Tennessee, currently, I believe they're 1-3. Will Levis, roller coaster with that guy. They're dealing with some issues. So, I don't know if they're going to be a team that really turns it around. But having said that, Eric, did you want to add anything else before we get out of here?
I also looked at linebacker because they're desperate for an upgrade. Now, I do have a name, and it's on the Eagles. Ben Van Sumeren. Get this guy in the game. They're already suffering. They already are ineffectual in coverage. At least have a guy who will trigger downhill, like, he just got the star in Mario. Van Sumeren plays fast. He can make impact plays. He could make forced fumbles. And even if he's out of position, which he will be, because we know that that's one of his weaknesses, he has enough burst and explosiveness to make up for that to some degree. And it's not like you're losing out on much. So, and here's the last thing I'll mention on him. He has potential. So unless he gets experience in NFL games and has a chance to improve some of these weaknesses, you'll never know what you're going to get out of him. So I'd love to see him get in the game. Obviously, the coaches haven't put him in there for a reason, but at this point, it's like, what do you have to lose? Would you try him out there?
Um, I mean, I like to see if we can get some of the issues fixed first because he looked pretty rough in the Vikings game, just out of position a lot. And that's like vanilla schemes in the preseason. What happens when they're sending fast motion at you in all different types of directions and you're constantly having to change where your gap is? And then next thing you know, they're also pulling linemen, so your gap's still evolving and changing, right? So I'd like to see if we can get the issues fixed with the guys that they thought were best to start the season first. And then after that, start to look for other answers. But I mean, you started, in the offseason, you stated your dark horse pick to get playing time is Oren Burks. And I think he's a guy that might end up filling in. There's a reason they kept him around, right? So what about your boy Burks?
Yeah, yeah. We just haven't heard from him, but I I have a if people who listen to this they know this. I have a small obsession with big linebackers. Well, all the guys we have out there, well, not Bond, but a lot of the guys we're trotting out there, they're small. Dean is small. Even they put Trotter in the game. He's tiny. They don't put Devin White out there, but if they did, he's small. So yeah, I'd love to see Burks get in there. Now he's rough in coverage at times. He when he was younger he moved well, but he's pretty burly and trudges around the field to some degree. And he got eviscerated in the second half of the Super Bowl when he had to fill in. But he does bring some physicality and size, and I think that is needed. You see Baker Mayfield, a small quarterback, drop back, and you see tiny N'Kobe out there, and he's just like, bloop. It's so easy. Even I see N'Kobe in the hip pocket of the receiver, but he doesn't have the like extension with his arms to be able to make a play on the ball. So that's problematic. So yeah, I would look for other answers, namely because what do you have to lose? It's not like you're gonna replace him and be like, oh gosh, now those two impact run throughs that N'Kobe makes per game, we've lost those, we're screwed. It's like, yeah, but how about the 6 passes that he gave up for 80 yards? So
Right, right, right.
maybe
And that,
Sidney Brown.
yeah, right. Now, the only thing I would say about going outside of the building to try and get someone to drop into this defense is for a defense that's already having communication issues and assignment issues, is grabbing someone outside of the building, dropping him into this defense. Is that really what's going to fix the problems? I don't know. I don't know if that's really the route to go. But having said that, we are wrapping up this podcast. We will be back Wednesday with our preview video for the game. And Wednesdays are going to be the new schedule for when those preview videos will be out. They will be out. Oh, excuse me. I actually got that wrong. Thursdays are when those will be out. This upcoming video will be Wednesday just because we have the bye week, extra time to prepare. But the preview videos will be coming out Thursdays now instead of the Fridays when they have been coming out. So make sure to pay attention to that. But make sure to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.